tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 12th part of What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Muerte then looked back at her nephew who smirked at her before growling something. However, no one knew what he just said except for two. Arslan shot Ophis and Tiamat a mischievous look as the corner of his mouth grew a bit, forming a grin. He said, "You better cover your ears." Tiamat cried out to the group as she covered her ears with her hands. Ophis instantly did the same, followed by the deities, Asia, Kunu, Ravel, Gasper and the rest except Issei, who looked at everyone with confusion. "And why should we dash?" he began to ask before covering his ears with a cry of pain when Arslan opened his mouth to release an earth-shaking guttural roar. For a full minute, Arslan kept his roar, but when he stopped, he turned his head to look at the people on his back before grunting when he felt someone punching him on the forehead. "Bad dragon. Do you want to make us deaf?" Esh sternly asked her son as she glared daggers at him. The leonine dragon growled softly before looking up at his mother with what could be similar to kitten eyes. Oh, the girls and Gasper all cooed at the sight with hearts in their eyes as they looked at him, while the boys had different reactions. Kiba was rolling his eyes with amusement while Issei was grumbling about him stealing the girls' attention. "Onizen. Can you fly now please?" Kunu asked her brother figure with puppy eyes, which was soon followed by Asia, Lofei, Gabriel and Kaneko along with Ravel. Arslan/Harry shot them a blank stare before sighing deeply by the nose and nodded his head. As the girls squealed in excitement, the leonine dragon god opened his wings, showing in all their glories before flapping them a couple of times. Then he charged forward before jumping high in the air, eliciting cries of distress and slight fear from his passengers. When he looked ready to fall, the massive leonine dragon flapped his wings and flied away from his previous spot. Arslan/Harry had always loved flying ever since he first felt the wind on his face so many years ago when Muerte taught him how to use his shadow wings. The young lord always looked forward to go flying, but thanks to all the things that happened recently, he didn't really got the chance to. But now here he was flying in the dimensional gap with his friends and family on his back or on his head in Esh's case. As he flied, the leonine dragon cast a quick glance behind him to see how were his passengers before smiling fondly at the sight of Asia, Ravel, Gabriel, who despised being older was still childish and innocent, Kunu and Lofei looking around with wide eyes of amazement. Rias and the rest of her peerage were chatting with one another while his girlfriends were enjoying the gentle caress of the wind against their hairs or simply caressing his fur, except Ophis, who was chatting with Muerte and Destiny. Arslan shot them a warm smile before looking back ahead. A lot of things was passing through his mind as he still couldn't believe that he was now a dragon god. A malicious smirk grew on his face at the thought of how the wizarding world, especially Dumbledore and his parents, would react at the sight of him in this form. Shaking his head, the leonine pushed away his thoughts as he returned back to present. It was only him, his family and his friends, no one else but them. Then he felt something caressing his right horn and glanced up to look at Esh, who looked back at him with a warmth smile on her appealing face. "I'm proud of you, my son," she whispered to him into his left ear, and he smiled at her in response before looking back ahead. He was with his family now, it's all that mattered to him. And with him being a dragon god, he would not let anyone harm his loved ones, not now, not ever. On his back, his girlfriends were looking at him with nothing but pride in their eyes. The man they loved was no strong enough to fight against gods. Deep down, they were really lucky to be the girls of such a powerful person, a person they would protect at all cost. Their thoughts trailed back toward the menace that was the wizarding world, and a feeling of determination spread through their hearts as they nodded their heads at each other. If those people of England dared to take their love from them, they would make them suffer slowly and painfully. Harry was laying alongside his mother Esh and some of his other girlfriends, mainly Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis, as they all were in the dimensional gap. Akeno, Seraphol, Gabriel, Yasaka and Kuroka couldn't be with them because they have duties to take care of, while Destiny, the deity of fate, and Muerte were equally doing their usual work. It had been a few days since Harry became Arslan, the celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice, and he had been learning a lot thanks to the three sisters Esh, Destiny and Muerte. Now he completely controlled his new form and even got to control his new abilities. Now, as a dragon god, he had access to many other type of powers. Immense strength, immense durability, blessing, and telepathy were among them. But what was blessing exactly? Easy, Harry was now able to bless people and give them abilities and advantages. However, Harry/Arslan also discovered that he had his own powers. He was able to control opposite elements with perfect ease: light/shadow, earth/air, water/fire, water/lighting, etc. Before becoming a dragon god, Harry could easily control all those elements, but he had an affinity with fire and shadow as they were easier for him to control. But now, thanks to his new form, he could all control them as easily as breathing. Right now, Harry/Arslan was in his dragon lion form, laying on the ground like a normal cat would. Laying against his muzzle were Esh, Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis. On his head, sitting on one of his horns, was a familiar white royal phoenix with amber eyes who was ruffling her feathers. Ophis loved the silence of the dimensional gap, and Arslan Harry grew to like it as well, as it was indeed enjoyable. Beside him, Rainier and Tiamat were busier enjoying the softness of his white fur than enjoying the peaceful silence around them. Esh, for her part, was gently caressing her son's gigantic muzzle. The primordial deity of life had, ever since Harry became Arslan, tried to get to know her son more, and the dragon god wholeheartedly accepted. A strong bond formed between the two of them, an unbreakable one similar to the bond Harry formed with Muerte. Harry would have loved to get to know his other aunt Destiny, but she was almost never around except to say hello, but even then, she would leave after a few minutes. There's nothing better than to relax and enjoy the peace and quietness, don't you agree? Esh asked the others with a content sight as her right hand was still caressing her son's white fur. I do, Arslan responded telepathically back to his mother with a soft smile on his muzzle. Agree. Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis all replied at the same time in perfect synchronization, while Hedwig released a soft happy thrill from her place. Nothing could break this moment, Rainier inquired with a smile and a content sigh as she pressed her head against Harry's furred cheek, who shot her an amused look but didn't comment on it. Ophis started to hum with agreement when she suddenly froze, which caused the others to stare at her with some concern. Ophis-sama? Rainier asked the Ouroboros dragon with some concern and worries. He is coming, Ophis replied as she stared at nothing in particular. However, they all saw how her eyes narrowed in pure anger and annoyance. Instantly they knew that it must be something big, as Ophis wasn't known to get angry. The only time she was like this was when something annoyed her, when there were loud sounds, or when someone spoke of Great Red. Who is coming? Rainier asked the infinite dragon god as she still hadn't made the rapprochement. Him, Tiamat replied with a shiver of fright as she stared at the same place that Ophis. Frowning, Harry/Arslan turned his large head toward where his two girlfriends were looking at, only to see a large portal appearing in thin air. From the portal appeared a large creature, but not any creature, a dragon. It was a massive red western dragon with a horn on its snout and who possessed 2 sets of wings. Arslan, once the dragon fully came out of the portal, could easily tell that the newcomer's length was around 100 meters at most. It was the second biggest dragon he had ever since, the first one being the Midgard serpent. However, himself was far from being tiny compared to the red dragon. After all, he was 96 meters long and 40 meters tall. Arslan, as he stared at the dragon, couldn't help but growling deeply in anger as he instantly realized who it was. This dragon was none other than the one who kicked Ophis out of her home, the dragon who was known as the most powerful one in existence, the Apocalypse dragon himself, Great Red. The newcomer looked at if everything around him was his and didn't even glance in their directions. From what Muerte told him, Great Red acted like a delinquent who would do stupid things in the gap and would get aggravated when people stared at him. Ever since he became a dragon god, he knew he would have to meet the apocalypse dragon one day, and it seemed that this day has come. Baka Red is here, Ophis commented under her breath with pure anger in her voice, but then as the others were about to comment, they all froze as a menacing growl escaped Arslan's throat. Without warning, the celestial dragon god rose on his paws before opening his jaws to release a loud earth-shaking roar while spreading his wings to show himself in all his glory. Esh, Tiamat, Rainier and Ophis had to cover their ears to avoid turning deaf, but once Arslan stopped roaring, they all saw Great Red stopping in his track. Before turning his large head to look at them, or more precisely at Arslan, the two dragon gods stared at each other dead in the eyes, and Esh quickly used her powers to transport everyone away as they knew those two would surely fight. Even Hedwig decided to stay away from the two colossal beings currently glaring at each other. Hogwarts, England, Wizarding World. In Scotland, it was raining hard. Many people were trying their best to stay at home where it was warmer, but it was not what was interesting us. No, it was what was happening in a famous place well known in the wizarding world, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a place known as the best magical school of the world and one of the 3 schools in Europe. Hogwarts was a large 7-story high building-like castle with 142 staircases throughout its many towers and turrets and very deep dungeons, which was built in the early Middle Age by 4 famous wizards and witches, Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Helga Hufflepuff and Salazar Slytherin. Many people, more like all of them in the wizarding world, went to Hogwarts, but Muggleborns usually left after they graduated. Why? Because of the bigotry and prejudice of the Ministry of Magic or the purebloods' disdain for them. The few of them who dared to stay weren't treated better than insects or were given miserable works. Back to topic, in one of the school's office, 2 people were talking. The office in question was the headmaster's office. It was a large circular room with many windows and many portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses. Inside the room were none other than Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, the school's current headmaster, who was sitting on his desk as he faced his visitor. Who was it? Answer, Alastar Mad-Eye Moody. You wanted to see me, Alastar? Albus inquired the scared First War veteran with a twinkle in his eyes. Albus, some of the men we sent in Japan are back, the scarred Auror began to say in a gruff tone. Oh. Did they found the boy? The headmaster asked his old friend with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Ever since the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries, Albus Dumbledore, the Order of the Phoenix and the Ministry of Magic sent parties all around the world to find the missing Potter. However, the old wizard was one of the few who knew that Harry Potter had cast himself out of the Potter line years ago and may not be called as a Potter anymore. Dumbledore wanted to find the boy so he could mold him into the perfect weapon against Voldemort, the most dangerous and powerful dark wizard to have ever walked upon this earth. He, at first, thought that Jacob Potter was the child of the prophecy, and it was a shock when he discovered how wrong he was. Now, they had to find him, as Harry was the only one who could kill Voldemort, from what the prophecy said at least. But there was also another reason for him to retrieve the missing boy. From what the Goblin Griphook told them, Harry became Lord Peverell, and because of this, he managed to get a hold on the Deathly Hallows, old powerful artifacts who granted their owner the power to control death itself. Dumbledore wanted those artifacts so he could become immortal, but all his dreams crashed when he discovered this. For him, no one deserved those titles except him, as he thought he was the only one who can lead the wizarding world to greatness. Back to present, Alastar stared at the older wizard with a serious expression on his face, but also a hint of sorrow in his eyes, albeit barely visible. Albus, they are dead. We sent 9 men and 6 of them were sent back to the ministry in small packages, the scarred Auror roared to the headmaster, whose face blanched in shock and horror as he stared at his old friend. For a full minute, we could hear nothing but silence until a thrill of sorrow echoed from nearby. The thrill came from a large bird with crimson feathers on its body and a golden tail which looked similar to a peacock's. It was roughly the size of a swan, and its claws and beak were gleaming gold along with black eyes. It was Dumbledore's familiar, a phoenix by the name of Fawkes. The old wizard glanced at the majestic bird before releasing a deep sigh. When he was sure to be calm enough, the headmaster of Hogwarts turned his head to look back at the scarred aura. What about the last three? What happened? Dumbledore asked Moody with a serious face, the twinkle of his eyes no more there. Two of the remaining lads are beyond salvation. Whatever they saw had broken them to the core. Albus, they will have to spend the rest of their lives in St. Mungo's hospital, Alastor answered to his old friend with a tone filled with anger, sorrow and disappointment. Albus shook his head with his eyes closed. It seemed that what Mundungus said were true. Japan were truly meaning it when they said they would severely punish any English wizards and witches who dared to enter their territory. Sighing deeply, the old wizard reopened his eyes to stare back at Alastor, who had not moved from his spot nor said anything. What about the last one? Dumbledore asked him softly but with another deep sigh. He is currently at St. Mungo, but before then, he had told us what happened, Alastor began to say gruffly with narrowed eyes. Albus's eyes were locked on the scared aura as he hoped to hear good news for once. If they managed to found Harry, then he must go in Japan to retrieve him so he could bring the poor lad back to the light and under his thumb for good measures. From what he told us, the moment they arrived on Japan, they had been arrested by Japanese auras. It was as if they knew people from England would come, the scared First War veteran inquired to the headmaster, who frowned after those words reached his ears. How is this possible? How did they know about our searching party? Albus asked to himself before silently growling as one person in particular came into his mind, Lily. Lily Potter, the brightest witch of her age, had voiced her disapproval of him sending people to Japan despite the warning they received from Say country. She was not the only one who were in disagreement with him. A few members of the Order were against this, and among them was Severus. Severus Snape, the potion teacher at Hogwarts, was a spy from both sides, himself's and Voldemort's, but Albus didn't thought that the man would do such things. His thoughts were broken by Alastor's voice as the scared Auror said something that shocked him to the core. Apparently, someone else was there. He might be the one who told the Japan government about our party's arrival. Who was it? Albus asked him with some concern. We don't know, but from what the lad said, whoever it was wearing a dark cloak, the same one the Death Eaters use. Alastor responded in a gruffly tone. Those words caused Dumbledore to growl in frustration and a bit of anger. Of course Voldemort would know about his plans, as Severus had surely told him. But he never thought that he would do such things as to denounce them to the Japanese government. Anything else I should know, Alastor? Albus asked the scarred Auror as he planted his head between his hands. Yes, the Japanese told the guy to send us a message, the war veteran replied before going silent. What is it? Dumbledore asked him with some curiosity and concern, as he was wondering what was the message. Intrude in our grounds again and you will face our wrath. Alastor replied with a gruff voice. Hearing this, the headmaster of Hogwarts groaned in frustration as he found himself now in an impasse. If he sent more people to Japan, then he would create a war with the country in question, but if he didn't, then he might lose the only chance to find his precious weapon against Voldemort. Amelia is furious with you, Albus. She asked every Aurors to keep an eye on the Order and to arrest them if we tried something again. How would she knew about the Order? Did someone told her? Albus asked his old friend as he jumped on his feet with alarm. Sirius Black did, and to be honest, I don't blame him. I quit, Albus. From this day on, I'm no longer a member of the Order. Alastor Dumbledore began to say in shock as he tried to reason with his old friend but was interrupted by Say friend. No, Albus, I agreed to join your Order to fight Voldemort, not to be the cause of a possible future war with another country. Alastor replied back sternly before disappearing through the flue. Dumbledore slumped back on his chair with a depressed sigh. In the inside he was furious at Voldemort for telling the Japaneses of his party's arrival, furious at Sirius Black for going as far as to tell Amelia Bones, who were members of the Order of the Phoenix, and furious at Alastor for leaving. While the old wizard fumed in silence, Fawkes shook his head with sadness as he was ashamed of how his partner turned into. At first, Albus was a just and noble man, but slowly, the power he gained corrupted him to the point that he thought to be the only one who could lead the wizarding world. You got what you deserves, old fool. Fawkes thought to himself with a satisfied glint in his eyes as he stared at Dumbledore, who was currently grumbling something under his breath, something about greater good and fool people. Suddenly, the old coot's head rose as a strange smirk grew on his face, a smirk that sent shivers down Fawkes' spine. Curious about this change of behavior, the noble bird used the bond between them, even if it was becoming weaker and weaker as the time passed, to look at what the old fool was thinking. I will let Tom find the BRT for me, and when Severus will announce me his location, he will be back where he rightfully belongs. Under my thumb. He heard Albus saying to himself in his head. After those words were said, Fawkes couldn't contain the shiver of fright from coming from him when his partner released what sounded like a mad cackle. Why did I become his familiar again? The noble bird thought to himself with despair as he looked at what Dumbledore became. Elsewhere. Under Malfoy's manor, another conversation was taking place, but this time not between Dumbledore and Alastor. No, it was between Lord Voldemort alias Snakeface and one of his followers who happened to be the owner of the manor, Lucius Malfoy himself. Lucius. Report. The Dark Lord inquired the blond man as he sat on his throne with Nagina coiled at his feet. Dumbledore's men had been arrested and killed, only 3 of them still lived, but they won't be getting out of St. Mungo before a long time, my lord, Lucius explained to the snake-faced man before him with a bow of respect. Good, really good. What else? Voldemort asked him with ravishment as he caressed Nagini's head with a hand which caused said snake to hiss with content. The Japanese government had sent a message to the Ministry of Magic stating that if they dared to send more people on their grounds, then it would cause a war between our 2 countries, Rodolphus replied before Lord Malfoy could. Good, maybe it will teach the old coot to back down after this. What about the man you sent, Rodolphus? The Dark Lord asked the Lestrange man with a raised brow of curiosity. My lord, he had been allowed on Japan's ground as long as he doesn't cause trouble. He had helped in arresting Dumbledore's men. Hearing this, Voldemort couldn't retain himself from letting out a loud cackle which sent shivers of fear through everyone's spines. Wonderful. Without Dumbledore and his DMN order, our spy can look for Potter without problem. Send him a message. I want him to warn us in case he found the BRT. The snake-faced man ordered to Rodolphus, who bowed to the waist in answer. Of course, my lord, I will do it now. And with that said, Rodolphus left the room to send his MSTR's order to his spy on Japan's ground. Once Rodolphus was out of sight, Lucius turned his head to look back at Voldemort before clearing his throat to say, My lord, what should we do now? The Dark Lord stayed silent for a moment before a mad grin grew on his face. I want you and some men to go out and have some fun in Diagon Alley. Hearing this, Bellatrix Lestrange cackled madly, and she was quickly followed by many other Death Eaters. Voldemort, looked at his followers with satisfaction as he stroked the top of Nagini's face. Soon, Harry Potter, we shall meet, he inquired softly to himself before joining his followers in their cackling. Elsewhere. Meanwhile, Harry was laying alongside his mother Esh and some of his other girlfriends, mainly Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis, as they all were in the dimensional gap. Akeno, Seraphol, Gabriel, Yasaka and Kuroka couldn't be with them because they have duties to take care of, while Destiny, the deity of fate, and Muerte were equally doing their usual work. It had been a few days since Harry became Arslan, the celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice, and he had been learning a lot thanks to the 3 sisters Esh, Destiny and Muerte. Now he completely controlled his new form and even got to control his new abilities. Now, as a dragon god, he had access to many other type of powers. Immense strength, immense durability, blessing, and telepathy were among them. But what was blessing exactly? Easy, Harry was now able to bless people and give them abilities and advantages. However, Harry/Arslan also discovered that he had his own powers. He was able to control opposite elements with perfect ease, light/shadow, earth/air, water/fire, water/lighting, etc. Before becoming a dragon god, Harry could easily control all those elements, but he had an affinity with fire and shadow as they were easier for him to control. But now, thanks to his new form, he could all control them as easily as breathing. Right now, Harry/Arslan was in his dragon lion form, laying on the ground like a normal cat would. Laying against his muzzle were Esh, Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis. On his head, sitting on one of his horns was a familiar white royal phoenix with amber eyes who was ruffling her feathers. Ophis loved the silence of the dimensional gap and Arslan Harry grew to like it as well as it was indeed enjoyable. Beside him, Rainier and Tiamat were busier enjoying the softness of his white fur than enjoying the peaceful silence around them. Esh for her part, was gently caressing her son's gigantic muzzle. The primordial deity of life had, ever since Harry became Arslan, tried to get to know her son more and the dragon god wholeheartedly accepted. A strong bond formed between the two of them, an unbreakable one similar to the bond Harry formed with Muerte. Harry would have loved to get to know his other Aunt Destiny, but she was almost never around except to say hello, but even then, she would leave after a few minutes. There's nothing better than to relax and enjoy the peace and quietness, don't you agree? Esh asked the others with a content sight as her right hand was still caressing her son's white fur. I do, Arslan responded telepathically back to his mother with a soft smile on his muzzle. Agree. Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis all replied at the same time in perfect synchronization while Hedwig released a soft happy thrill from her place. Nothing could break this moment, Rainier inquired with a smile and a content sigh as she pressed her head against Harry's furred cheek, who shot her an amused look but didn't comment on it. Ophis started to hum with agreement when she suddenly froze, which caused the others to stare at her with some concern. Ophis-sama? Rainier asked the Ouroboros dragon with some concern and worries. He is coming, Ophis replied as she stared at nothing in particular. However, they all saw how her eyes narrowed in pure anger and annoyance. Instantly they knew that it must be something big, as Ophis wasn't known to get angry. The only time she was like this was when something annoyed her, when there were loud sounds or when someone spoke of Great Red. Who is coming? Rainier asked the infinite dragon god as she still hadn't made the rapprochement. Him, Tiamat replied with a shiver of fright as she stared at the same place that Ophis. Frowning, Harry/Arslan turned his large head toward where his two girlfriends were looking at, only to see a large portal appearing in thin air. From the portal appeared a large creature, but not any creature, a dragon. It was a massive red western dragon with a horn on its snout and who possessed 2 sets of wings. Arslan, once the dragon fully came out of the portal, could easily tell that the newcomer's length was around 100 meters at most. It was the second biggest dragon he had ever seen, the first one being the Midgard serpent. However, himself was far from being tiny compared to the red dragon. After all, he was 96 meters long and 40 meters tall. Arslan, as he stared at the dragon, couldn't help but growling deeply in anger as he instantly realized who it was. This dragon was none other than the one who kicked Ophis out of her home, the dragon who was known as the most powerful one in existence, the Apocalypse dragon himself, Great Red. The newcomer looked as if everything around him was his and didn't even glance in their directions. From what Muerte told him, Great Red acted like a delinquent who would do stupid things in the gap and would get aggravated when people stared at him. Ever since he became a dragon god, Harry knew he would have to meet the Apocalypse dragon one day, and it seemed that this day has come. Baka Red is here, Ophis commented under her breath with pure anger in her voice, but then as the others were about to comment, they all froze as a menacing growl escaped Arslan's throat. Without warning, the celestial dragon god rose on his paws before opening his jaws to release a loud earth-shaking roar while spreading his wings to show himself in all his glory. Esh, Tiamat, Rainier and Ophis had to cover their ears to avoid turning deaf, but once Arslan stopped roaring, they all saw Great Red stopping in his track. Before turning his large head to look at them, or more precisely at Arslan, the two dragon gods stared at each other dead in the eyes, and Esh quickly used her powers to transport everyone away as they knew those two would surely fight. Even Hedwig decided to stay away from the two colossal beings currently glaring at each other. On a platform meters away from the two colossal dragons, Esh, Rainier, Tiamat and Ophis were watching the scene with different reactions: shock, concern, worry, and a bit of excitement. The last one was concerning a certain infinite dragon we all know and love. Do you think they're gonna fight? Rainier asked the other three with some concern. However, before one of them could answer her, Arslan slammed his club-like tail hard against the ground in an intimidating manner, growling in what looked like anger. Well, does that answer your question? Tiamat asked the fallen angel with a small amused smirk which caused Rainier to glare back at her. Ophis, however, completely ignored what her HRM sisters were saying as her whole attention was on the two colossal dragons standing meters away in front of her. Two powerful creatures who were about to fight each other, one had chased her from her home and the other was the man she loved, her mate. She was so concentrated on them that she didn't hear Esh speaking to Tiamat and Rainier. I think look for the rest of my son's friends. They might want to learn about this. The primordial deity of life inquired hurriedly before disappearing in thin air, leaving behind 3 physically young women and 2 angry dragon gods. At the same time, Rias and the rest of her peerage were in the underworld, training. With them, there was Kuroka, who had been allowed to come in the underworld after the truth of what happened years ago came to light. The black-haired Nekishu was with her younger sister Kaneko as the two of them were doing senjutsu. However, they quickly stopped when a portal made of light opened not too far from them. What the Issei began to ask in shock when a familiar light red-haired woman with leaf-green eyes stepped out of the portal before facing them. My lady! Rias cried out in surprise as she instantly bowed in front of the primordial deity, quickly followed by the rest of her peerage and Kuroka. Rise everyone! You don't need to bow before me, Esh inquired them with a smile before her expression turned serious again. I'm here to warn you. About what? Kiba asked the deity with some curiosity. Is Onizen alright? Asia asked her with nothing but concern shining in her eyes. Instantly, Kaneko perked up at the mention of Harry and stared at the primordial deity with alert as she was now concerned for her Itoko. Kuroka was acting the same as she couldn't help but feeling that something big was happening to her mate. Esh took a deep breath before looking at the blonde nun and answering, he is currently facing great red as we speak. What? Rias, her peerage and Kuroka all cried out at the same time as they stared at the primordial deity with nothing but shock and disbelief. Is he mad? Rias asked loudly in shock as beside her, her entire peerage were thinking the same. He is going to get killed. Akeno and Kuroka both inquired at the same time as they were now worried sick for the man they loved. Asia, Gasper and Kaneko glanced at each other with nothing but concern as they all grew to see Harry as a brother/cousin figure. Even Zenobia was concerned for him as she shared a worried look with her fellow knight Kiba. Esh watched them with a small smile as it warmed her heart to see how much those young people cared for her son, but then she released a strange whistle which strangely sounded like a bird cry. The sound caused the young devils to stare at her with some curiosity. My lady, what are you? Akeno began to ask her boyfriend's mother when suddenly, in a burst of flame appeared a familiar white royal phoenix, Hedwig. The majestic bird thrilled in greetings as she flied above their heads before landing on a branch near Esh, who reached her out with a hand to pet the top of her head. Hey Hedwig! Asia waved to the noble bird, who thrilled in delight at the sight of the blonde nun. Esh smiled at the two before her expression turned serious again. Dear Hedwig, I want you to go and tell Kasaka that Harry is going to fight the apocalypse dragon, then go to heaven to fetch Gabriel. She might want to be there. The white royal phoenix nodded her head in determination, but before she could go, a hand appeared near her head with a piece of bacon inside it. A little gift for you, Head. Asia inquired to the phoenix, who thrilled loudly in thanks before greedily swallowing down the offered piece of bacon. With another soft thrill, the noble white bird disappeared in a burst of flame to do what she was asked by her former owner. Esh watched her go before looking back at the young people before her. I will go fetch my sister, see you later. The light red-haired primordial deity waved to the group before disappearing through a portal of light. Let's go fetch Sona and her peerage. They need to hear about this, and next we must find Serafal-sama. Rias instantly ordered her first knight once Esh was no more there. They all nodded in understanding, but before Rias could use her magic to open a portal, Kuroka stepped forward. For my part, I will go see Arthur and Lofei. They might want to know what their cousin is doing. Rias nodded at the black-haired Nekishu and watched as Kuroka disappeared in thin air to fetch the Pendragon siblings. Then the redhead opened a portal to Kuo Academy to see Sona and her peerage. Before Esh went to the underworld, Arslan and Great Red were having a strong conversation as they stared at each other with nothing but anger in their eyes. "Who are you? What do you want?" The Apocalypse Dragon asked his interlocutor with a masculine annoyed tone. "My name's Arslan and I am the celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice." The white dragon god said to the red dragon, whose face changed from annoyance to curiosity. "Oh. I heard about you, Arslan, son of Esh, and I have to say I'm not impressed by you in the slightest. You might be a dragon god now, but you are nothing but a hatchling compared to me." Great Red inquired haughtily as he looked at the dragon lion with a bit of disdain. Arslan growled in outrage when those words reached his ears and slammed the tip of his tail against the ground, smashing rocks and reducing them to pieces. "And this hatchling is asking you to return this place to its rightful owner and leave at once?" The celestial dragon god inquired to Great Red in a demanding tone as he flexed his claws into the dirt. His attention was so focused on the red dragon that he didn't see his mother leaving to who know where. "Leave? Why should I? This place is mine. I fought Ophis to get it." Great Red retorted to his interlocutor as he bared his teeth in anger. "Exactly. Ophis is the rightful owner of this area. You are nothing but a thief and an arrogant prick." Arslan snarled back with dare. Hearing this, the Apocalypse Dragon roared in anger and fury as he glared at the white dragon lion god with hatred. However, Arslan wasn't scared by his roar in the slightest and in fact, didn't flinch like many would in this situation. Instead, the celestial dragon god opened his jaws to release a loud thunder-like earth-shaking roar. Great Red, surprisingly, didn't flinch from the roar and was currently looking at the younger dragon with a smirk on his face. "Not a bad roar for a hatchling, really good," the Apocalypse Dragon commented to his interlocutor with a hint of respect in his tone. "Could you stop calling me hatchling? I'm part lion." Arslan inquired him in a harsh and annoyed tone as behind him, his tail was waving aggressively. "Let me think about this, Great Red began to say before going into what looked like mock consideration. Arslan growled in annoyance when the Apocalypse Dragon reopened his eyes to say, "I don't think I will stop nor will I leave." Hearing this, Arslan growled again, but this time with a hint of disappointment as he realized that the only thing he could do to kick this annoyance out of there was battling him. So far, Great Red was exactly like how Muerte described him, annoying, arrogant, haughty, etc. At the same time, Ophis, Tiamat and Rainier were watching the same with a bit of worry. They had been listening for the whole conversation while Tiamat and Ophis did, and they translated for the last girl and were wondering if the love of their lives will be able to take on the most powerful creature alive. They watched as the two colossal beings growled at each other, with their mate occasionally slamming his tail on the ground or flexing his sharp claws. Suddenly, their attention turned away from the dragons to their right, where a group of people appeared through portals. There were Rias, Akeno, Asia, Kiba, Zenobia, Kaneko, Kuroka, Seraphal, Sona and her peerage, Issei, Esh, Muerte, Ravel, Arthur Pendragon, Lofay Pendragon, Gabriel, Irina, Gasper, Yasaka and finally Kunu. Hedwig first went to Tokyo to warn Yasaka of what was going on. Needless to say, the leader of the West Yukai faction instantly went to see her boyfriend and was quickly followed by Kunu, who wanted to see her Onizen again as it had been a bit of time since they both saw him. After delivering her message to the Kitsunes, Hedwig headed toward heaven, where she was instantly greeted by a usual joyful Gabriel and opposed Michael. The white bird told them through mind what was currently happening in the dimensional gap, and the female seraph quickly inquired Michael if she could go, which he allowed. Back to present, all of them were now facing Tiamat, Rainier and Ophis, as in the distance, we could see Arslan and Great Red growling at each other. "There we go. Did we miss something?" Esh asked Ophis, Tiamat and Rainier once the portals disappeared. "Not really, they just argued and exchanged growls and snarls," the Karma Dragon responded with a shrug before looking back at where the two dragon gods stood. "So that's Great Red?" Issei asked out loud as his eyes landed on the large red dragon god. "Yes, the Apocalypse Dragon himself," Rias replied to her pawn as she stared in shock and concern at the two facing dragons, currently glaring at each other. And an annoying BRT if you ask me, Muerte grumbled under her breath, but those who heard her, glanced in her general direction with a frown of confusion. Do you think Lord Peveril will win? Rosweiss the former Valkyrie inquired to everyone with some concern in her tone. Of course he is. Cousin Harry is the strongest, Le Fay Pendragon quickly answered in the affirmative and with a joyful smile on her face. It was as if she wasn't worried for her cousin. To be honest, I don't know. While Harry may have beaten Riser, Regulus, Serorg, Fenrir and Kokabeel in single combat, I don't think he is strong enough to take on the most powerful being in existence. Sona answered Rosweiss's question in a neutral tone, ignoring Le Fay's intervention. Then we must help him. Kuroka inquired strongly with a fire of determination burning in her eyes to the others. At those words, Arthur, Zenobia and Kiba all pulled out their respective swords while the others unsheathed their own weapons, magic or sacred gears. Even Ophis summoned her snakes as she was ready to have another round with the dragon who took her home from her. Esh and Muerte were about to say something when a new voice echoing nearby caught everyone's attention. Stay where you are. Turning their heads, they all saw who yelled at them, and many of them were shocked to find Destiny, the primordial deity of fate herself, stepping out of a portal with a stern and serious look on her face. Sister. Esh and Muerte both called out in shock and stupor, while the others less Ophis quickly bowed in respect for the newcomer whose eyes were locked on her sisters. Destiny, the infinite dragon, greeted in her usually bored-like tone but with a small nod. The primordial deity of fate nodded at Ophis before looking back at her sisters who were still staring at her with godsmacked expressions. Miss, why are you stopping us for helping Onizen? Kunu asked Destiny with the cute puppy eyes which were filled with nothing but concern for her brother figure. The primordial deity of fate turned her head to look at her and saw that Asia, Lo Fei and Kuna had the same expression of concern and the same cute puppy eyes written on their faces. Destiny's expression softened at the sight of the three before answering in a gentle and kind tone. Because it is Harry's fight ever since he was born, I plan to make him fight against Great Red. What? Why? Esh cried out to her sister with disbelief and betrayal. However, Destiny didn't seem bothered by this, and she explained in a neutral tone, for two reasons: one, to show everyone Harry's place in this world, and second, to teach a certain lizard a lesson in humility. Everyone stared at the primordial deity of fate with deadpan expressions on their faces as the only thing you could hear in the air was silence. Baka Red? Learning humility? Pfft. As if. Ophis grumbled with a roll of her eyes. I must agree with Ophis here, Great Red cannot change. He is far too stubborn and arrogant for that. Muerte nodded her head in agreement at the infinite dragon's words. He will if he is humiliated enough, Destiny replied with a dark grin on her face which sent shivers down everyone's spines. Let me guess, it is you who led Great Red to Harry. Esh hissed with some anger to her fellow primordial deity, who nodded her head with a grin. He might be a dragon god, but I can still control his mind whenever I want, Destiny explained with the same dark grin that earlier. Suddenly everyone's attention turned toward the two colossal dragons as they were now roaring at each other loudly. The ground had no choice but to cover their ears because of how deep and loud the roars were. They all watched as Arslan spread his wings to show himself in all his glory, with his feathers green and blue ones glowed with power along with his eyes. Great Red, shook his head in an intimidating display as he growled in anger. In response, the celestial dragon god raised his tail up into the air before smashing it hard against the ground, creating a small crater in the process. As he did this, Arslan flexed his huge claws while glaring daggers at the other dragon god. Great Red smirked at his rival. He had to admit that he didn't had a good fight since Ophis. And yet the infinite dragon had been easy to take down. However, when his eyes first landed on this new dragon god, Great Red knew that he would not be taken down as easily as Ophis. And to be honest, he was excited at the prospect of fighting. The Apocalypse Dragon was the most powerful being in existence, with Ophis as second despite him not being the biggest dragon alive, and he had to admit it would be nice to have someone powerful to equal him in terms of strength and power. Until now, he never found such a being who might be able to keep up with him. the apocalypse dragon himself, and today, this recently made dragon god had the gall to challenge him and demand him to leave. He would have ignored him like he did with so many others, but this new dragon possessed a power inside him that Great Red couldn't ignore. It was a strong power which rivaled his own. Another thing that surprised him was that this new dragon was not fighting him for glory but for someone he considered weak and pathetic. Ophis. I won't say it again. Leave this place now. Arslan commanded to the apocalypse dragon with a snarl of defiance. I don't take orders from anyone, and not from a pitiful hatchling such as you. Great Red replied haughtily as he stared at the celestial dragon before him. Arslan/Harry's eyes twitched at being called a hatchling again as his annoyance toward the apocalypse dragon currently standing right in front of him. His dislike toward Great Red grew even more now as it seemed that the true Red Dragon Emperor was too arrogant to back down without a fight. However, it was the next words that enraged Harry/Arslan greatly. You should return to your mother, little one. You have no chances against me. Go cry in your mother's skirts like the hatchling you are. Great Red commanded with a shrug before turning around as if he was leaving. Seeing this, Arslan's blood boiled with nothing but anger because the Red Dragon was dismissing him as if he wasn't worthy to even look at. Without warning, the celestial dragon god roared loudly with furor before opening his jaws to release a bluish-green plasma blast. Great Red, when he heard the roar, stopped his attempt to leave with a grin as his plan to make the younger dragon mad had worked. However, what he didn't plan was for a strange blast to crash against his side which sent him flying away before landing HRD on a large platform. Nice shot, buddy. Issei cried out to the celestial dragon from his place as he and the others stared at what Arslan just done. Look. Kuroka pointed at the apocalypse dragon with a shocked look on her face. Following her finger, the others saw something on the red dragon's left side before gasping in shock when they saw a rather impressive burn mark on his scales. Even better, some scales fell from the dragon's burned side. Ophis smiled with satisfaction as her eyes shined with pride as she looked at her mate who was right now glaring daggers at Baka Red. Onizen touched him. Kuna cried out in pure joy and amazement as her mother Yasaka smiled at her daughter's antic even if herself was amazed by this fact. The others were simply staring at the scene in silence, either too stunned to speak or they were just waiting for what will happen next. Esh, Destiny, and Muerte shared a glance with one another and a smile before looking back at their son/nephew whose eyes were still locked on the apocalypse dragon. Speaking of him, he was slowly going back on his feet, shaking his large head to get rid of the dust before moving his eyes to look at where the plasma blast touched him. For a few seconds, Great Red stayed silent as he was still looking at the wound he received from the dragon-lion hybrid before turning his head to face his fellow dragon god. No bad, not bad at all, but it won't be enough against me, the apocalypse dragon remarked to Arslan with a small grin on his horned snout. We will see about that, the celestial dragon god replied back with a smirk as his eyes suddenly glowed brighter. Before he suddenly disappeared in thin air. Where a colossal white dragon-lion hybrid previously stood, there was nothing now but dust, dirt and wind. Blinking, Great Red's eyes scanned the area in hope of finding his fellow dragon god. He wasn't the only one to be surprised by this sudden disappearance and in fact were now looking around to find the celestial dragon. Where is he? Rias asked loudly as her blue eyes looked around with some concern. I don't see him anywhere. Kiba added with a frown, even if we could see the worry in his eyes as he stood beside his girlfriend Tsubaki Shinra, who looked just as worried. It was mainly thanks to Harry that the two of them got together after all. How could he vanish like that? Zenobia cried out as her own eyes scanned the area to find the missing dragon god. Asia, Kunu, Gasper and Lufei were looking around with nothing but worry and alarm as they looked for their brother/cousin figure but were unable to see him. Akeno and Gabriel looked just as alarmed as the young ones as they looked around for their boyfriend. Rosweiss opened her mouth to say something when she noticed something strange. Yasaka, Kuroka, Kaneko, the primordial deities, Tiamat and Ophis were all looking at something with grins. Frowning in confusion, the former Valkyrie slowly followed their gazes before gasping silently when she saw it, the faint shape of a large body moving through the wind which was heading toward a certain apocalypse dragon who was still looking around to find his opponent. Suddenly, with a thunderous roar, Arslan reappeared out of nowhere with a raised clawed paw, the right one right in front of Great Red's face. His wings were now glued against his sides and his fangs were barred in a menacing manner, while his eyes were now two glowing green-blue pools. The red dragon barely had the time to react when Arslan's paw made contact with his face. The impact sent Great Red's head slamming hard against the ground, while the celestial dragon jumped backward in case the apocalypse dragon attacked him in retaliation. As he stared at his opponent, Arslan didn't saw the look of pure shock/pride on his family's face. Most of them still couldn't believe that he managed to strike Great Red again despite having seen it with their own eyes. "Did you all see that?" Issei cried out in pure disbelief as he stared at the celestial dragon with nothing but respect in his eyes. "I think we all did, partner," Drake replied from the gauntlet as the Welsh dragon was still in awe of what just happened. "How?" Rias whispered in disbelief as she stared at Harry/Arslan, whose eyes were still locked on the red dragon god. The rest of the group was too stunned to answer verbally, so the only answer they gave was a nod of their heads. The young ones Asia, Lofei, Gasper, Kunu and Kaneko had stars in their eyes as they looked at the celestial dragon with amazement. Yasaka, Gabriel, Tiamat, Ophis, Akeno and Seraphol all smiled with pride at the man-dragon lion they loved. The deities Esh, Muerte and Destiny were looking at the scene with different expression. Esh's face was filled with worry and maternal concern, while Muerte's had a small evil grin, even if some concern could be seen shining in her eyes for her beloved little nephew in all but BLD. Destiny's face, however, was emotionless, or so it seems. Because if you looked more closely you could see the worry in her eyes. She might look straight and emotionless, but she loved her family dearly. Back to the dragons, Great Red slowly raised his head from the ground before looking at Arslan with a glare. The left side of his face was severely wounded and now harbored deep claw marks. He was lucky to not have lost his eye. The celestial dragon looked at his work with nothing but satisfaction on his face before saying in a smooth mocking tone, "What about that, huh? Still not enough for you?" Following this question, a deep rumble escaped Great Red's throat as his eyes were locked on his fellow dragon god with nothing but pure anger. "Not bad, maybe you are not a hatchling after all," the apocalypse dragon begrudgingly admitted with a growl. "Told ya," Arslan replied with a snort and an amused grin. Huffing in annoyance at his fellow dragon god's antic, Great Red went back to stood at his full size while spreading his large wings to show himself in all his glory. He was a bit impressed by the fact that the younger dragon didn't seem intimidated by his size despite being obvious he was the bigger one, but then shook his head to focus on what was currently going on. "However, you shouldn't have done that," the apocalypse dragon inquired to the celestial one with a glare that sent shivers down everyone who saw it minus the primordial deities and Ophis. "And why that?" Arslan inquired him back with a frown of confusion as he instinctively flexed his claws into the dirt. "Because now I'm mad." Great Red replied loudly with a cavernous roar before charging his enemy with his horn pointed at the dragon-lion hybrid. Arslan roared in protest as he quickly jumped out of the way to avoid being stabbed by his enemy's large horn. However, as Great Red's horned face passed before him, the celestial dragon lunged at his enemy's scaled neck, using his serrated fangs to attack his opponent. Great Red roared in pain when he felt the fangs piercing his scales and skins, but then gritted his teeth as he shook himself in an attempt to get rid of the celestial dragon. But it proved futile as Arslan had a stronger grip than he thought. From their places, the devils, fallen angels, deities, kitsuns, and dragons were watching the scene with pure interest mixed with amazement and awe. "Keep going, babe." Kuroka cried out in encouragement as she cheered for her boyfriend alongside Akeno and Rainier. The black-haired Nekasha was quickly followed by some others. "You can do this, pal." Issei yelled to the celestial dragon encouragingly. "Go Onizen, go." Asia and Kunu screamed at the same time as they stared at their brother figure with stars in their eyes as beside them, Gasper silently cheered with them. Sona and her peerage were simply speechless as their eyes were glued on the fight. They were totally stunned by what was going on and they couldn't even form words. Nearby, Irina and Zenobia both watched the tussle with amazement while Gabriel was silently praying for her boyfriend's victory. Ophis and Tiamat shared a brief glance before looking back at the fighting dragon gods with a smile on their faces. Beside them, the deities looked at their son/nephew with a proud expression as they watched him clawing and biting mercilessly the most powerful being in existence. Back to the fight, Arslan, while adding more pressure in his bite, used his claws to attack Great Red, who roared in pain each time he felt his skin being clawed by his opponent. But then, without warning, the celestial dragon was sent flying away as a large whipped him on his left side. Arslan landed HRD on the dirt and he hissed in pain when he tried to get back on his paws. The apocalypse dragon's tail didn't miss him one bit. One thing was sure, it will definitely hurt later. Grunting, the celestial dragon fought against his pain as he slowly went back on his paws before turning his head to look straight at Great Red, who was doing the same. The apocalypse dragon was covered with deep injuries which gave Arslan some satisfaction, but Great Red was far from defeated if the glare he was sending his way was proof enough for this statement. "Now you have done it," the apocalypse dragon roared in fury as he charged his enemy with a speed that shocked more than one. Arslan just had the time to stand on his hind legs when Great Red slammed into him. However, the celestial dragon noticed with relief that he hadn't been impaled by the red dragon's large horn, and in fact their front paws/hand were pressed against one another. Growling, Arslan used his strength to push his opponent away, but Great Red used his own strength to do the same. From their seats, Arslan's friends and family were watching the battle with stars and/or shock in their eyes or on their faces. Ophis's eyes shined with pride as she stared at her mate with a small smile on her face. Even her hadn't lasted that long against Great Red, and to see Harry/Arslan was right now doing what she couldn't was both embarrassing and exciting. She strongly hoped that her mate won against Great Red, as she really wanted to tease Baka Red on his defeat. Beside her, the rest of the spectators were cheering from the Dragon-Lion hybrid. "Yes, Onizen!" Asia and Kuna cried out at the same time in perfect synchronization as they stood beside Yasaka, Gabriel and Kaneko. "You are the best, babe." Akeno, Rainier and Kuroka yelled with pride as they looked at the battling dragon gods. Sona and Rias were watching the fight with stars in their eyes, as again they were really proud to be friends with Harry/Arslan. The rest of the devils were watching the tussle with the same look of amazement and awe on their faces. "It's not a battle now, it's a showdown." Tsubaki inquired loudly from her place near her king Sona and her boyfriend Kiba. "Lord Peveril will never stop surprising me," Rosweiss commented with a smile as she looked at the Dragon-Lion hybrid. Ever since she first laid her eyes on the young black-haired green-eyed man, Rosweiss had seen him do a lot of things which would be almost impossible for people like her. And here he was, once again, fighting against an opponent that no one except the strongest would dare to oppose. "Harry, my love for you is growing even more now," Yasaka thought to herself as she looked at the man she fell in love with a warm smile on her pretty face. Esh looked at her son with a proud expression on her face. What mothers wouldn't be proud of their sons for being strong? Muerte couldn't help but smiling warmly as she stared at her nephew. He was no more the cute little boy she had rescued from the Dursleys so many years ago. Destiny smiled at her nephew as she felt nothing but proud of him. The young man went through hardship ever since he was born, but instead of turning evil like many would have done in his place, he kept being a humble, kind and noble man. While the spectators were watching, none of the dragons were unable to push the other away as they stood on their hind legs. "DxD." The celestial dragon thought to himself with frustration as he and the apocalypse dragon were now unable to attack the other with their claws. However, his thoughts were quickly interrupted by Great Red as the apocalypse dragon relentlessly attacked him by using his fangs. Arslan snarled in anger as he dodged every bite the red dragon tried to give him. "Cheater!" Arslan thought to himself with anger and disgust as he understood why Great Red was doing this. The apocalypse dragon was trying to weaken his hold by making him focus on his head and now on his front paws. However, as he dodged another bite, an idea came through his mind which caused him to smirk toothily. Without warning, as Great Red readied himself to throw his head forward again, Arslan violently pulled his left front paw out of the red dragon's hand before swinging it forward. His sharp claws made contact with the right side of Great Red's head and the Apocalypse Dragon reared his head back with a roar of pain. Again Arslan almost touched his eye. Galvanized, the Celestial Dragon roared loudly before charging his enemy with his horns pointed forward. Great Red yelped with surprise when he felt something lifting him from below him and looking down to see Arslan. The Celestial Dragon was using his horns to lift the Apocalypse Dragon off the ground, and Great Red noticed something that caused him to be slightly worried, an evil smirk. The large red dragon yelped with shock when Arslan tossed his head backward, sending his charge flying meters away from his previous spot before tumbling on the ground. The Celestial Dragon then quickly turned around to look at where Great Red landed with a proud look on his muzzle. The spectators were speechless as they stared at the white dragon-lion hybrid with nothing but shock and stupor at what he just did. Who wouldn't be? He just lifted Great Red with his horns before tossing him like he was nothing but a rag doll. The deities shared an amused grin at the faces most of the people present were making. Muerte shot a glance toward Ophis before giggling softly at the godsmacked expression the infinite dragon was harboring. However, most of Harry/Arslan's lovers went back to loudly cheering for him a few seconds later. Yes babe, yes. Go Harry. Teach him who's the boss. If you win, you will get the biggest reward in the universe. At those words, a large portion of the people present stared at Kuroka with deadpan expressions on their faces as sweat drops could be seen falling on their foreheads. Kuroka blushed at the attention she received, but she didn't seemed repentant about what she said. Her HRM sisters shot her mischievous grins before saying at the same time, "You bet on it." Deeper deadpans followed this declaration as Rias slapped her face with her hand, grumbling about corny idiots, which caused Sona to nod in agreement. "I have to admit I have never seen such things before," Drake commented softly to himself as he stared at Arslan and Great Red, and thankfully, his wielder didn't hurt him as Issei was too busy staring at the dragons with nothing but shock. But then three familiar feminine voices echoed in the air, breaking the silence caused by Kuroka's previous words. "Go Onaizen go!" Kunu cried out to the Celestial Dragon from her place near her mother. "You are the strongest cousin." Lu Fei cried out beside her older brother, who stared at the white dragon-lion hybrid with his usual straight face. "Beat the mean dragon." Asia cried out with a hopeful expression and a bright smile. The deadpan expressions everyone harbored minus the deities and Ophis all changed into amused smiles at the youngsters' antic before they all went back to look at Arslan, who was still facing Great Red. As the Apocalypse Dragon was slowly going back on his feet, the Celestial Dragon shot a glance toward his friends and family. Ever since the fight started, he heard their encouragements, and this alone caused his heart to melt with warmth. He was once again thinking about how lucky he was to have such a family. Their encouragements gave him more courage and strength to fight against the creature who was considered as the most powerful being in existence. He would not leave them down. He will win this fight. No, he must win. Shaking his head to regain his composure, Arslan turned his head to look at Great Red, only to see the Apocalypse Dragon lunging at him with fury. Roaring in protest and surprise, the Celestial Dragon found himself being pinned down by his attacker. He tried to get back up, but Great Red had a strong grip on him and maintained him down. "Now it's my turn." The Apocalypse Dragon inquired with a dark grin before biting Arslan in the right shoulder. A roar of pain escaped the Celestial Dragon's mouth as Great Red added more pressure in his bite. This scene was not missed by the spectators, who all opened their mouths to encourage him or insult the Red Dragon. "Leave Onaizen alone, you bully!" Kunu cried out in anger for the Apocalypse Dragon. "Get up!" Akeno cried out loudly for her boyfriend. "Don't stay down!" Rainier and Kuroka said at the same time from their places. "Get up, pal!" Issei inquired loudly to the Celestial Dragon. "Fight!" Kiba, Zenobia, and Irina all said in perfect synchronization as they looked at the dragons. Esh, Muerte, and Destiny looked at the scene with worried expressions on their faces, especially the primordial deity of life, as she was now really concerned for her son. However, she knew that she couldn't step in as Destiny would surely stop her for doing so. She had no choice but to stay there and watch. She wasn't the only one who wanted to jump in and help Harry/Arslan. His girlfriends all wanted to assist him in his battle against Great Red, but when Rainier tried to fly toward him she was pushed back by an unknown force. Who did this? Try to guess, still don't know. Little clue, she had dark blue hairs. As for why she was preventing people from helping Harry, well, the answer was simple. It was his final test, a test to show his true position in this existence. Meanwhile, Arslan was hissing in pain as Great Red was using his front claws to savagely wound his side while still biting on his shoulder. The celestial dragon felt nothing but pain as he felt his skin being pierced by the apocalypse dragon's fangs and claws. Of course, Arslan tried to squirm his way out of the red dragon's grip but was unable to. You should stop struggling, hatchling. You are strong but you will never win against me. Great Red inquired haughtily before biting his shoulder again, eliciting another loud roar of pain from his victim. But then he heard shouts coming from the distance and listened carefully. He recognized those voices, his family, his friends, they were all calling for him, encouraging him. He wanted to keep fighting but didn't know how to push Great Red away from him. My son, get up, Dash's voice echoed in his mind in a soft tone. A tone filled with worry, warmth and maternal love. Arslan, despite being in pain, turned his head to look at where his mother was and saw her looking back at him. Her green eyes locked into his and he could see how worried she was for him. The celestial dragon then saw his girlfriends' faces and they harbored the same expression. His eyes then caught Luffy, Asia, Kunu and Gasper, and again he saw the worry on their faces. A deep rumble escaped his throat as a fire of determination started to spread through his body. He hated seeing his family like this. I cannot give up, I will not give up, he thought to himself before firmly pressing his paws against the ground to lift himself up. Great Red pulled his head away from the dragon-lion hybrid's shoulder with a blink of surprise at the sudden action, but then used his strength to push his opponent back down only to fail. Arslan then violently pushed himself up with a roar of defiance which caused the apocalypse dragon to back away a bit. The red dragon god stared at his opponent with surprise. The look of pain he saw not long ago in the celestial dragon's eyes was gone, in fact it was now replaced with determination. He saw him flexing his claws and his tail was swinging menacingly. The white dragon-lion hybrid looked ready to fight if the barred teeth was not proof enough. After a few seconds, Great Red shook his large horned head to regain his composure before turning his eyes back to Arslan, whose tail tip slammed against the left side of his head. What happened? Well, the celestial dragon took advantage of the red dragon shaking his head to attack him. He turned his whole body while preparing his club-like tail to strike his enemy, and the second Great Red looked back at him. Well, you know this part already. Ouch! It must hurt, Rainier inquired with a wince, and some of the people present mumbled their agreements as they all watched this from their platform. I never thought I would say this, but I'm glad to be in this gauntlet for once, Drake inquired softly to himself, and again his wielder didn't hurt him as the brown-haired perv was focused on Harry/Arslan and Great Red. Back to the battle, the celestial dragon growled menacingly to the apocalypse dragon as he slammed his tail again against the ground in an intimidating manner. Great Red turned his head to stare at his opponent with a hint of respect in his eyes, but then it was replaced with anger when he saw the defiance in his enemy's eyes and roared a challenge, to which the celestial dragon accepted with a firm nod. Taking a deep breath, Arslan then opened his jaws to release a torrent of flame, but not aimed at his enemy but at the area around him. This action confused more than one, as Great Red and those who watched were wondering what he was doing. The answer quickly came when the celestial dragon stepped forward into the flames. His body was now a mere shadow and his eyes were glowing with power. The apocalypse dragon growled at his enemy and was about to charge when Arslan spread his wings above the flames. To the spectators' amazement, the blue and green feathers glowed brightly and their colors mesmerized them. Greatly, most of the girls present were staring at them like this. The boys were equally staring at the feathers with nothing but amazement. They all looked like they were attracted by them in some way. So appealing, Rias mumbled in awe as her eyes stared at the glowing feathers with stars in her eyes. So pretty, Kunu, Gasper, Asia and Luffy said at the same time before looking at each other with a bit of shock at the fact they said it in perfect synchronization, much to the amusement of those present. The only ones who were not infected by the color show were none other than the primordial deities, who shared an amused glance as they stared at the rest of the group. Why is Lord Peveril doing this? Rosweiss asked Softy to herself as she tickled her chin in thought. He recently discovered this technique, Muerte began to say before Esh took over with a soft mischievous smile. When he uses it, Harry can distract someone for a moment. It's like he is hypnotizing them, in short. The group processed this information except Ophis, who had been there when Harry first tasted this ability of his. The infinite dragon blushed a bit as she remembered how much she was attracted by her mate's appealing feathers. Really effective technique indeed, Sona commented with a nod as she glanced at Great Red, whose eyes were locked on Arslan's colorful feathers. How long can he do this? Rias asked the deities with some curiosity in her aqua-blue eyes. Esh opened her mouth to answer when a roar of pain interrupted her. Turning their heads, they saw with horror Arslan being pinned down by Great Red. How did that happen, you may wonder? While the spectators were talking, the Apocalypse Dragon had used his tail to whack his opponent on the head, which caused the latter to stop his hypnosis. The Celestial Dragon didn't have the time to react when the slightly larger dragon used this moment to pin him down. Growling, Arslan glared at his opponent before smirking deviously when his opponent opened his jaws to bite him again. Seeing the smirk, Great Red stopped his attempt as he was wondering why his opponent was smirking. The answer soon came when the Celestial Dragon's tail crashed against his side. A roar of pain escaped Great Red's jaws as a loud crack-like sound could be heard from where the club-like tail tip touched him. The sound only caused many to wince. Great Red backed away from Arslan, who jumped back on his paws before lunging forward when the Apocalypse Dragon lowered his head down to inspect the bruised spot. Great Red roared in protest when Arslan's fangs made contact with the back of his neck and tried to shake him off, but to no success. The Celestial Dragon then moved his head to the side before violently tossing his opponent in the air. Great Red tumbled on the ground for a few meters before crashing against a huge rock-like structure. Without giving him more time to recover, Arslan opened his jaws to release 3 plasma blasts which collided with the Apocalypse Dragon's exposed side, earning a loud roar of pain in the process from the large red dragon. However, because of the blasts, the large rocky structure fell right on top of Great Red, who soon found himself being buried by rocks. Arslan stared at the place where his opponent was buried as a large cloud of dust covered the latter from view. The Celestial Dragon waited and waited, but for a few minutes, there was nothing. Cautiously, Arslan stepped closer to his fallen opponent before stopping right in front of where the red dragon previously stood. The white dragon-lion hybrid slowly extended a paw forward to pull out some rocks. Only to jump backward with a roar of surprise when Great Red suddenly burst out from under the rocks with his horn pointed forward, ready to impale his enemy. Thankfully for him, he managed to be out of the horn's way, or else he would have really felt it badly. "I'm not defeated yet?" Great Red inquired deeply but also tiredly to his opponent before charging him with the full attempt of winning this battle once and for all. Keyword, yet. Arslan growled back in response before doing a 370 degrees. The Apocalypse Dragon roared in pain again as his opponent's tip tail slammed against his face again. "Stop with the DMN tail." Great Red demanded painfully and angrily to his opponent as he shook his large head before glaring daggers at the white dragon god. "Let me think about this." Sorry, I won't." Arslan replied cheerfully after a few seconds of mock consideration. The Apocalypse Dragon growled in outrage at being talked like this and lunged forward again with his horn ready to impale. Smirking, the Celestial Dragon jumped aside, and when Great Red was close enough, he lowered his own head down, pointing his horns forward before charging. "Not again." Great Red yelled in annoyance as he found himself being lifted off the ground again before being tossed around like a rag doll by his enemy. Arslan couldn't retain the grin of amusement from appearing on his muzzle at this declaration. However, it quickly disappeared when Great Red spread his wings while in the air before flapping them hard. Flying above the white dragon god, the Apocalypse Dragon stared down at his opponent with a grin on his horn snout when Arslan cursed something under his breath in annoyance. "You are a good opponent, I have to admit, but I wonder if you will have the same luck in the air." The Apocalypse Dragon inquired to his opponent before diving at him. Roaring in protest, Arslan quickly jumped out of the way before spreading his own wings and taking off. Without warning, the celestial dragon opened his jaws to send a plasma blast toward Great Red, who ducked to the left before avoiding another blast from his enemy. Arslan shot a few more blasts before stopping. It was useless to keep doing something that his opponent could see. Wait, see. A smirk grew on his face as an idea came through his mind. Almost instantly, a strong wind surrounded the smirking celestial dragon before disappearing. What? Where is he? Great Red asked internally to himself as he looked around to find his target. A part of the group of people watching him from afar, there was no other dragons around. Blinking, the Apocalypse Dragon quickly looked at the group of people before a smirk grew on his face. A smirk that didn't go unnoticed because a few seconds later, a plasma blast crashed against his back, sending him forward. Turning around with a growl, Great Red opened his jaws to say something only to pause when he saw absolutely nothing in sight. Suddenly, another blast crashed against him, but this time on the right side before another one was aimed right at his already bruised face. The roar he released was filled with nothing but pain as the wounds on his face burned greatly. Why the face? Great Red roared loudly in annoyance and pain before another blast crashed against his back. Because it's ugly. Arslan's voice echoed from nearby deviously, and the Apocalypse Dragon turned his head toward where the voice came from. Only to groan in pain when something rammed into him. The impact caused both him and his invisible attacker to crash HRD on a large platform, which formed a large cloud of dust to surround them. A few seconds later, once the dusty cloud dissipated, Great Red found himself on his left side with a large paw pressed against his neck and another one on his belly where he could sharp claws piercing the scales. Opening an eye, he was shocked to see the smirking face of Arslan standing just above him. Do you yield? The celestial dragon asked him with a growl as the smirk faded like ice under sun. The Apocalypse Dragon didn't know what to think or do at the moment. He was a bit tired of this tussle, and a quick look at his opponent could tell that he was just as exhausted as he was. However, Great Red still had more than one string as he used his tail to whack Arslan on the side in an attempt to get rid of him. His plan succeeded because he managed to push his enemy away from him. Arslan tumbled on the ground for a few meters before landing on his side. Groaning in pain, the celestial dragon god slowly turned his head to look at the red dragon. Should I take this for a no? The celestial dragon asked him with a glare and bared teeth. For a few moments, nothing was heard in the air except silence as the Apocalypse Dragon stared at his opponent right in the eyes. The celestial dragon-lion hybrid was growing more and more unnerved with the lack of answer, but then he blinked at the unexpected question. How? How what? Arslan asked him with a frown of confusion. How can you equal me? Great Red asked him with a serious look on his face along with shame. Maybe because I wasn't blinded by arrogance or pride like you, because I was fighting for those I love, Arslan answered with sincerity, even if he was still wondering why the Apocalypse Dragon was asking him this. Great Red stared at him for a few more seconds before sighing deeply while closing his eyes. Seeing this, the celestial dragon slowly went back to his paws, but still cautious in case his enemy would treacherously attack him. But he didn't. Instead, Great Red slowly went back on his feet but still had his eyes closed as if he was thinking about something. Arslan watched him briefly before looking at his body. He had received some injuries from the Apocalypse Dragon and his shoulder was still bleeding profusely. Sighing, he was about to lick his wound like most cats usually do in the same situation when he saw in the corner of his eyes Great Red turned his horned head toward him. Arslan stiffened a bit when the Apocalypse Dragon's golden eyes landed on him but tried to remain as strong as possible as he stared back. Me, Great Red, the Apocalypse Dragon, recognize Arslan the celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice as my equal. Great Red inquired in a solemn tone as he bowed his head at the white dragon god who stood there with a stunned expression on his face. He wasn't the only one, as from their places, his friends and some of his girlfriends were staring at the scene in complete silence as pure shock was written on their faces. Ophis, however, had a look of pure ravishment on her face as she looked between her mate and Baka Red. Esh, Muerte and Destiny all smiled proudly to the young dragon god and shared a brief glance at each other before looking back at them, waiting. Arslan's stunned expression turned into a serious one as he and Great Red shared a nod of respect for one another. "You know, I wouldn't mind having another tussle in the future," the Apocalypse Dragon inquired to Arslan with a small grin. The Celestial Dragon blinked in surprise at the unexpected request but then grinned back toothily, "Maybe. I hope to see you around, Arslan," Great Red said with a nod before turning around to leave, but he didn't got the chance as someone called out for him. "Will you let Ophis take back her home?" Arslan asked him with a serious raised brow. "Why should I?" The Apocalypse Dragon asked him, but not with annoyance but with some curiosity. "Because she is my mate," Arslan replied back with a growl. A long silence followed those words before Great Red opened his jaws to answer, "All right. You know, you are not totally like how people describe you," Arslan inquired to the Red Dragon with understanding. "How do they see me as?" Great Red asked him with a raised brow of curiosity. "A delinquent, an arrogant dragon, a thief, should I go on?" The Celestial Dragon asked him with a grin. "No thank you," the Apocalypse Dragon replied with a deadpan expression, "and for my defense, when you live as long as me with no one to give you a challenge or talk with, well, let's just say it change a guy. Why would people wouldn't talk to you?" Arslan asked Great Red with a frown. "Maybe because I am the most powerful being in existence and AF dragon." The Apocalypse Dragon replied in a bitter tone. "Fair point, but don't you have a human form?" "No," was Great Red's answer. "I see, well then how about being friends?" The Celestial Dragon inquired the Red One in a somewhat friendly tone. You would do that? Being my friend?" Great Red asked him with disbelief as if he couldn't believe it. When Arslan nodded his head, the Apocalypse Dragon smiled in response before turning serious again. "I must go now, I will see you later." "How?" the Celestial Dragon asked him with confusion. "By dreams," the Red Dragon answered before disappearing through a portal. Arslan watched him leave before sighing deeply. He was glad that this battle was over. But then, something caught his attention, or more like someone. Harry. Turning his large head, he saw his friends and family rushing toward him, and he crouched down on the ground before lowering his head between his front paws. "You were amazing, babe." Rainier cried out with pride as she hugged his muzzle, quickly followed by the rest of her HRM sisters, except Ophis, who was walking beside Muerte, Esh and Destiny in a slower pace. "Onizen is the best." Kunu cried out as she hugged one of his giant claws. "I knew you could do it." Seraphal happily remarked as she nuzzled his fur with affection alongside Gabriel. "The strongest." Asia and Lu Fei added to Kunu's words, which caused the two to high-five at each other. "You were amazing, pal." Issei inquired loudly to the Celestial Dragon, who purred a bit in response. "Indeed, you were impressive, Lord Peveril," Roswise said in a respectful tone as she, Zenobia, Kiba, Tsubaki and Arthur approached the Celestial Dragon. Arslan rolled his eyes at her antic with a snort before glancing at Rias, Sona and Kaneko, who approached him. "It was really impressive, Peveril-san," the Citri heiress began to say in a neutral tone before stopping when she saw the exasperation in the dragon's eyes. He had told her many times to call him by his names, but sometimes, either she forgot or she wanted to annoy, Sona would call him Peveril-san or Harry-san, something that was annoying to his opinion. His annoyance must have been noticeable because Rias giggled loudly with amusement and Arslan sent her a small glare which sadly didn't affect her in the slightest, as instead, she laughed even harder. Sighing in defeat, the Celestial Dragon turned his eyes to Kaneko, who gave him a small smile and a thumb up, to which he smiled in response. The white-haired Nekashu had never been a talker after all. Then Arslan's eyes caught Ophis staring up at him and slightly turned his head to look at her as she approached him. Her HRM sisters slowly stepped out of her way as the infinite dragon made her way toward her mate before hugging his muzzle tightly. Arslan purred softly in affection as he felt her tiny from his point of view arms on his muzzle, but then his ears twitched when he heard his mate saying in a soft tone, "Thank you." Anything for you, love, the celestial dragon replied back telepathically to Ophis, who gave him a small kiss on the muzzle which earned her a loud purr from him. The sight caused many to smile warmly at how cute it was. It became even more when the rest of Arslan/Harry's girlfriends along with Kunu, Asia, Gasper, Kaneko and Lufay went to hug him as well. Rias even pulled out a camera from who knows where to take a few pictures. After a few minutes, however, a cough caused many to turn around to look at the deities who were approaching. During this whole time, they had stayed away to let the younger ones have their reunion. Now it was their turns. Instantly, they all backed away from the celestial dragon except Ophis, who was still hugging his muzzle. Arslan's eyes, however, were now focused on his mother and aunts as they stepped closer. Esh was the first one to react as she embraced her son's gigantic muzzle before looking up at him with a warm smile. "I'm so proud of you, my son," she whispered softly to him, and he nuzzled her gently in response while trying his best to not push her in the process. "You did well, Harry, I'm proud of you as well," Muerte inquired to her nephew as she caressed his fur with a hand with a smile of her own. Nodding his head at her, Arslan then looked at the remaining sister, who hadn't said anything yet but was instantly worried by the straight face she was harboring. However, his worry quickly faded when a smile soon appeared on his face as she pressed a hand, the left one next to Muerte's. Then her eyes locked with his and he understood what she was thinking despite not saying it. "I'm proud of you," before a flash of light passed through his body which healed his wounds. Blinking gratefully at his aunt, he gave her a small smile and a nod, to which the primordial deity of fate returned before stepping back, still smiling. Arslan then felt a fresh wind ruffling his mane and slowly he went back on his paws, which caused those closer to him to quickly back away from him. When he was now standing on his full size, the celestial dragon slowly spread his large wings, showing his appealing blue and green feathers in the process. Arslan then closed his eyes to enjoy the ruffling of the wind even more before opening his jaws to release a thunderous roar which echoed throughout the dimensional gap. His friends and family all watched him with smile as they now faced the official rival of the Apocalypse Dragon himself, and they were proud to have such a being as a member of their little group. The younger ones looked at him with amazement and awe as their admiration for him grew even more after this episode. The deities smiled at the third dragon god before eyeing each other with sadistic expressions. Whoever who would try to harm Harry or his loved ones would regret it deeply. Elsewhere in Japan. Meanwhile, in Japan, a cloaked figure was hiding in the shadows while looking around for his target. Who was it? A now 18 years old man named Harry James Potter. His MSTR wanted him located, not captured. "Wherever you are, Potter, I will find you, and Lord Voldemort will reward me for this," the cloaked man mumbled with determination and a bit of glee before scowling as he sneered at the passing people. "Disgusting muggles, trash the lot of them," he grumbled under his breath with nothing but disgust before going back to look for his target while hoping it wouldn't take long to find the BRT. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 13. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.